Set up in 1936, Life magazine believed that pictures could change the world. The brainchild of publisher Henry Luce, it was a weekly news magazine packed full of extraordinary photojournalism. Through America's most dynamic decades, the 40s, 50s and 60s, Life documented its growth into a world superpower.
The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans.
But not in words, in pictures.
Really, Life is a celebration of America. That's what they're celebrating in the pages of Life. It's power, it's shift, it's change. It's a fantastic magazine because at that time, America was a fantastic place.
At Life, the photographer was king. They pioneered new forms of photojournalism like embedding and photo essays, and they caught the big moments in American history.
These are people directly in front of me who were being shot.
From political assassination to the civil rights movement.
I keep asking you this, but you weren't scared for your life at all?
I didn't think about it. I really didn't think about it. It was about the pictures.
And the new sexual freedom.
I was able to go live in Hugh Hefner's mansion and stay forever and ever and ever.
What was that like?
Well, it made me horny, I'll tell you that.
To me, the men and women who shot for Life are the gods of photography. I'm on a pilgrimage across the USA to find out how they told the story of America, what made them tick and what made them click. I'm starting with the first era of Life photographers from 1936, so I've come to Martha's Vineyard to meet a very special guy, Ralph Graves.
Hi.
Hello.
You must be Ralph.
And you must be Rankin. Almost certainly.
Nice to meet you.
Me too. Come on in.
How are you feeling?
Ralph held the top job at Life, managing editor. But when he started in the early days, he was a cub reporter, and it's those days I want to talk about. Because unlike any other magazine, at Life, it was the photographers who led and the reporters who followed.
Our job was to help the photographer get the story. We carried the photographer's bags, sometimes very heavy bags, and sometimes quite a lot of them. We were the pigs, and the photographers were the big-time farmers.
No other magazine held the photograph or the photographer in such high esteem. The list of guys whose bags Ralph carried reads like a who's who of photography. But they started with just four: Thomas McAvoy, Peter Stackpole, Alfred Eisenstaedt and Margaret Bourke-White. Bourke-White had the honour of shooting the very first Life cover. Glamorous, dynamic and completely fearless, she became a household name, and Ralph knew her very well.
She was very painstaking in the way she photographed anything. It took forever. She liked to use lights, flashlights for everything. I don't think she trusted God to handle the sun properly. She was going to do it. She had quite a reputation as a very hot property. Beautiful woman, very well dressed, always looked like a lady, which she wasn't totally. She slept with a fair number of generals, but they were important to her cause, and an occasional colonel, if he had authority for something she wanted to shoot. The Life picture editor sent a cable to another Life photographer, Elliot Ellishoffen, who was also covering World War II in Europe. This message was very insulting. It said, Bourke-White is getting stories that you aren't getting and pictures that you aren't getting. What's the matter with you? And Eliot sent back one of the legendary cables in life's history. He said, Bourke-White has a piece of equipment that I don't have. All those generals and colonels knew about it.
Bourke-White's methods may have been unique, but her three colleagues in those early days were just as inventive. Thomas McAvoy specialised in disguises and hidden cameras to catch people with their guard down. Peter Stackpole was the mad scientist, tinkering in his home workshop where he invented an underwater camera. But for me, the master of the first four was Alfred Eisenstaedt. Fleeing his native Germany in 1935, he brought with him a candid style of photography that became life's trademark. He's the one photographer who worked for the magazine from the beginning to the end on over 2,000 assignments. Izzy would become the grand old man of life and a photography legend.
Izzy, to look at, was not much. He was short, he was stocky, but very proud that he could do one-handed push-ups. One-handed. I was pretty damn impressed, and I saw him do it. He could shoot anything that moved so quick with a candid camera, lights almost never needed, and one or two shots and he was finished. Let's go on to something. Needle sharp, very certain of his skills.
These are all American military men saying goodbye to their sweethearts and wives at Pennsylvania Station. These were all taken not with the Leica, but the Rolleiflex. Do you know why with the Rolleiflex? Because with the Rolleiflex, I could focus like this at that time, with the old Rolleiflex like this, and hold it for minutes, like this. As you say, I talk to you like this, and watch you, and click there. See? Do this, and watch you again, absolutely motionless, like a stone. They didn't know that I photographed them. But if I would do this, and they would see me. What are you doing there? See? Like this, here like this.
I think all photographers look to Izzy as this kind of guy who we put up on a pedestal. I mean, if you know anything about photography, you put him on a pedestal. And he made him feel, to me, really cheeky and naughty. And the fact he does 100 press-ups and was shooting for the magazine into his late 70s, it's incredible.
Part of why the photographers of life are so influential is the millions of people who saw their work. The first issue rolled off the press in 1936. Every copy sold out on the first day. America took to it instantly. With success on the home front established in its first few years, it was the onset of World War II that really secured life's place in American hearts and minds. America didn't just want life, it needed it. From 1941 onwards, American husbands, sons and lovers were overseas fighting. You could hear about what they were going through on the radio, but the only place you actually saw it was in life. The horror of it and the occasional glory of it. The first photograph ever published of an American soldier dead was in Life magazine. Life was defined by its bravery. Its photographers dangled from helicopters and crawled into caves. They dodged bullets and survived prisoner of war camps. Robert Capper's pictures of the Omaha beach landings, Bob Landry's of French collaborators, or W. Eugene Smith's work in the Pacific. These are some of the most harrowing and emotional images in the history of photojournalism. It was a tough time for America, but right to the end of the war, life was there for them.
It was the long-awaited moment, and the lid was off. Unparalleled were the scenes as multitudes surged around Miss Liberty, throwing restraint to the winds.
And when victory was declared, life was there again. The magazine caught the jubilation and the spirit of America in 1945, and nowhere better than in this single famous frame by Izzy. I love the spontaneity of this shot. He stood, he waited, and he grabbed it. I'm going back to the same spot in Times Square to try to get my own Eisy moment.
Hey guys, you haven't got any idea where this was shot, do you?
Where that was shot?
Yeah.
I think it was over there. Because look, there's a Coca-Cola sign right down here.
I just spoke to the cops, and the cop says that there is a Coca-Cola sign, and he's saying that Coca-Cola have had that sign there forever and ever. So he's saying that it's most probably this way. If he was shooting this way, that would be the Paramount, and that's Bond's.
After half an hour of searching, I'm sure I found the spot, but I hadn't found anything to shoot. But Eisy must have been smiling down on me, because just when all hope was lost, these two popped up in the crowd.
Hi, I'm Rankin, nice to meet you.
Hi, I know you.
I'm a photographer from London, doing a documentary about Life magazines. And you guys almost look perfect for the photograph. We were wondering if we could quickly duplicate it.
We do.
If you could do the kiss, that would be brilliant.
I go like this.
You go like that, yeah. Hold on. That's it. And kiss. That's it. Hold on, wait for the cab. Lean her over. Here we go. Okay, go. That's amazing, one more. That's kissing. Yeah, we love it as well, brilliant. While I buy a wedding ring for your finger.
Nice.
Thank you, so lovely to meet you. Thank you.
America after the war was a changed place. It had become a superpower and was learning how to deal with that responsibility. Life was growing up too. The 4 startup photographers were now 38, and they were developing new ways of telling stories. Over 10 or 12 pages with just the tiniest amount of text, Life brought people their news by turning it into gripping, compelling stories using only photographs. They called it the photo essay, and it brought an intensity to news stories that had never been experienced before. Some of Life's essays are seminal. Stories like Leonard McComb's Career Girl, which took the issue of women in the workforce and turned it into a touching melodrama. And W. Eugene Smith's Country Doctor, essentially a call to arms for more GPs, but through his eyes, a poignant and heroic look at the work of a rural physician. Just a few blocks from Times Square lives John Loengard, one of Life's most influential photographers. He shot many brilliant photo essays for Life, as well as some amazing portraits. He also impressed the soldiers in Vietnam with his toughness and appetite for dog, lizard, even rats when food was scarce. John's not only a brilliant photographer, he went on to become Life's picture editor. I could talk to him all day about his work, but that's not why I'm here. I want to ask him about Life's photo essays, and in particular about the 2 giants who created its golden age in the late 40s and early 50s.
So in your opinion, was the photographic essay a Life invention?
I don't know whether the essay was, the term was. It was one that Henry Luce coined about a year after Life started. So it was something that he coined looking at what the magazine had done. And, you know, it really started in the first issue. Bourke-White had gone out to do a story on the workers at the Fort Peck Dam and how they spent Saturday night. And of course, what it does is takes the whole dam building story on the West, which was news, and gives it a human dimension.
I love that idea of it being an insight into people's lives, actually, as they were doing it, which you couldn't have done before because you didn't have cameras that were necessarily as fast
film that was as fast.
You didn't, no.
To be able to picture these people in the midst of what they were doing in life.
And you didn't really have the publications that sort of gave the opportunity to instruct photographers in that possibility. If you skip ahead to after the war, you have a change. And here, right after the war, one big thing is women wanting to stay in the workforce, women going to work, and to pick out one girl and one person in New York and focus on her, which Leonard McComb did. And Leonard had an absolutely brilliant way of being able to photograph absolutely ordinary things, telling you so much about the people in them.
Marilyn and Gwynedd take their morning baths hurriedly, according to a strict rotation schedule. The other placidly waits her turn and reads aloud from the St. Charles Cosmos Monitor, which is mailed to them daily and remains a firm link with home. The Bourke-White photographs, to these, yes. There's an intimacy, there's a closeness.
Yes.
And actually, as you go through, it gets closer and closer and closer.
Yes.
After a telephone squabble with Charlie, Gwynedd bursts into tears. She's under continual strain because she is anxious to make a success of her career. Tears might be caused merely by the shattering of a tumbler or a cigarette burner on a new dress. In this case, it was a simple and harmless vagueness of Charlie Strauss. For intimacy, McComb's photo essays have never been equalled. But the other master of the photo essay, who I have a special personal interest in, is W. Eugene Smith. It was seeing his work as a young man that made me want to become a photographer in the first place.
W. Eugene Smith, who I would argue is possibly the greatest photographer that was on the staff, he was doing essays that had extraordinary drama and emotion to them.
Having done his best for the child, Seriani is worn out and tense. He has stitched the wound in her forehead, but already knows that nothing can be done to save her eye, and tries to think of a way to soften the news for her parents.
An extraordinary amount of empathy in his photographs, where with Leonard you're surprised at how intimate things are. With Jean, I think you're surprised at how you understand exactly how anybody in the photograph feels.
In the kitchen, while the women whisper, Seriani telephones the priest to tell him that the old man will not live through the night.
I think that he had, this extraordinary ability, and what came with it were some personal liabilities, if you want. We all have them. And sometimes they got in his way.
I'm learning that to be the man from life meant many different things. Smith was definitely the tortured genius, life's Van Gogh, partly because he had such empathy for his subjects.
I do like to become so immersed in their life that I become a part of their life, maybe even a contributing part, although this is not my intent. And then I like to speak from that position. I like to speak of what I am participating in.
A unique blend of journalism and art, the photo essay became the very definition of what life was all about. All the next generation of photographers needed was stories, and America was going to provide them. The 1950s were the boom years for America. In a time of increasing affluence and after wartime austerity, Life was playing back to its readers images of their country and themselves that seemed both authentic and reassuring. Millions of people could discover modern American life, be stimulated by it, and feel part of it.
I can't
begin to tell you all the things in life this week and every week. News, sports, fashions, politics, everything. I have my copy. Why don't you get yours at your nearest news dealer tomorrow?
Life in America were now going steady and nothing was going to split them up. Nearly 100 million Americans looked at the magazine every week. That's more than half the country. Incredible. The man in charge of choosing and laying out the stories was a director of photography. Ron Bailey held that post and witnessed the impact Life had on ordinary Americans.
What do you think the American population loved about it so much?
I'm not sure. You know, it's for many years, it was the way we could see the world. We find it hard now with all the television and all the cable and all the internet where you can see videos.
Yeah.
But, you know, life, we always thought of life as the way of seeing the world. And it carried a lot of influence.
As a photographer, that's what you strive for. You strive to be able to have your photographs touch other people and make them feel something. And Life photographers had that.
Yeah.
And when I think about it, that gives me goosebumps. I'm like, wow, to be able to get those stories, to go and do those things, and not just essays, but brilliant science photos or brilliant portraits. You know, they had the ability to touch people.
Right. One of the most powerful stories we did while I was at the magazine was in 1969, and it was an editor's idea to take pictures, pick up pictures from families of the weeks dead in Vietnam. And I think it was 220 something. And we carried a photograph of everyone killed in that week. To me, that was the most powerful thing we could have done against the war, and I was against the war. Sometimes I think back on, you know, what was the impact of this matter? And the impact was there in I guess 1,000 other ways. When I was growing up, that was, you know, you looked at Life magazine and that was how you saw the world.
What Ron said is quite shocking. For one publication to be the window of the world is massively influential. I knew Life's coverage of Vietnam had turned people against the war, but talking to Ron made me realise Life always had that power. Right from the beginning, telling America what to think, not just about big world events, but about itself. Life always cared about the big issues of the day, but was devoted to small-town America. Stories of the lives of the ordinary people, their work, their pleasure, their anguish. The magazine returned to them again and again across the decades as if the small town summed up everything that Life believed in. But why? I've come to Wilson, North Carolina to meet photographer Burk Uzzle.
Nice to meet you. That's the famous red-eyed gravy. And you got to hold on to it because it'll walk by itself right out the door if you're not careful.
Burk came from a small town, travelled the world taking pictures for Life, and now he's back in one.
How do you think small town America, somewhere like this, kind of reflects America as a whole?
I think it's an interesting question because it in a way reflects what I both like and dislike about Life magazine. The great thing about working for Life magazine was that in those days, what you went for, the ideology of the magazine, was to go for that superb moment, the exalted moment. Even in a quiet people story, it was a really intense moment. Well, that brings me to a small town. Why would I live in a small town? In a way, it's more intense here than it ever was in New York, all the years I lived in New York. Because I get to know the people more deeply. I'm more involved with them. So there's an intensity of involvement possible within all the aspects of American culture in this little town of Wilson than I ever had in New York.
But why do you think Life was so obsessed with the small town? Because, I mean, you've got so many small town stories in the magazine.
Life was about the population at large. Life was not Vogue magazine. Life was not Condé Nast. Life, because of its small town orientation, seemed to care about real people.
So Life, because it was interested in the small town, cared about real...
I feel like it did. And you could go into a small town as a Life photographer and it would be like some TV star walking into town. I mean, you were a celebrity if you walked into town and said you were from Life magazine back in those days. And they would open the town up to you. And then it was your job to be respectful and to treat it seriously and to love it in your own way.
Burke's been taking photographs for over 4 decades, and I love that he feels the small town reveals something wider about America. At 23, he was the youngest photographer ever hired by Life. Pretty impressive. Then he went on to work for Magnum for 15 years. But despite a career to die for, he feels he's making his best work today.
Well, Rankin, this is one of the floors of the studio. This is the small studio.
This is the small one? Oh, wow, that's wonderful.
Some of his recent work is closer to fine art, but there's still echoes of life in a lot of it, and you can see him in every frame.
Why do you think you are still taking pictures? Because a lot of the Life photographers, when it finished, they gave up.
Went into real estate, yeah.
Yeah, because the fact that you're still shooting and the work is incredible is brilliant. I wondered why.
One of the first big conversations I ever had with a Life photographer when I was 23 years old, there was a Life photographer in the bureau by the name of Robert W. Kelly, who took me and says, "Now, Burke, you're a young photographer. I want you to know the secret to being a Life photographer." And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "You shoot every picture for the managing editor." And I thought to myself, you stupid shit. You don't have a ball to call your own. I mean, if you're taking pictures for the fucking managing editor, give it up right now, because you've got nothing to stand on. There's no you there. There's no there.
Most photographers would have killed for a staff job at Life, but Burke's not most photographers. Always a free spirit, he turned down their offer and worked freelance, determined to keep his independence.
There's some interesting life stories in here relate to... I'm going to have to do it down here. See, this is how life worked. I wanted to do a story on growing up in North Carolina. This is Cousin Balaji. This is my wife's uncle. And this is her father's porch. But this picture, the story you haven't heard, is that when they were doing the layout, the art director was Bernie Quint, and he'd made a layout and cropped out the dirt. And
How could you do that?
Which was the point of the picture. And he kept saying, "Well, this is the way I feel it." And I said, "Well, you know what? You didn't fucking grow up there. These are my pictures, and you can't do that to my work about my place." And he said, "Well, I can, so I'm the art director." I said, "Well, I'll be damned if you can." And I picked up the layouts, and I tore them up and threw them on the floor, and I picked up my color transparencies, and I walked out of the room.
What did they do?
Well, they had...
Well, they ran it.
They had some serious talks about my future at Life magazine with the director of photography. And he came and said, "You can't treat Bernie Quint that way." And I said, "Well, he can't treat my pictures that way."
Burke's work blows me away. It doesn't matter where he is, whether it's a sheep ranch in Wyoming or a kitchen in Minnesota, he finds that intimate human thing, that moment where the subject actually reveals themselves. It's close, it's personal, and it's intimate. Then again, he wasn't always allowed to get quite as intimate as he wanted.
I was able to go live in Hugh Hefner's mansion and stay forever and ever and ever.
What was that like?
Well, it made me horny, I'll tell you that. Oh, there was a lot of pretty poons, a lot of stuff walking around, and I was married at the time, and my wife, I was living in New York, and she said, "You're doing a story on Hefner, huh?" And she said, "Well, where are you going to be staying?" I said, "Well, close." And she said, "Well, I'm coming to Chicago." she came out and she checked into a hotel right down the street, and so I was able to reconvene with my wife whenever I would come out of the mansion, and that was a good thing.
For someone like me who's used to big city America, I didn't think places like this still existed. Burke's invited me to bring my camera to the weekly service at the Wilson Cowboy Church. Yes, you heard me, the Cowboy Church.
You know, you got this, the horse, the flag, that fell in the background, the ruins of the building. You know, there are a lot of things going on at once, and all the body language. It's just amazing.
Sinner, run and hide your face. Sinner, run and hide your face.
Working alongside Burke like this, I realised the life photographer was constantly performing a balancing act between joining the community and keeping enough distance to document it.
Now, you know, here at Cowboy Church, we think about horses and how things happen.
Some men from life came, made a fuss, got the shot and left. But those that got the best out of small-town America, like Burke, made real connections.
Jesus died on the cross in obedience to the Father.
And despite the modest subjects we're shooting, a bunch of horses, families and a church service, the big themes of America are somehow revealed. Patriotism, faith, nationhood and community.
And on that rock where Moses stood.
It's been really great, actually. It's been really great. And I think Burke, he's very interesting. I watched him all the way through the service, and he doesn't partake of the service. And he's very kind of stoic about the whole thing, which I kind of respect, because I'm very much of the same mind. You know, I'm there to look and document, not to be involved. But I got a bit kind of carried away with the past, and I liked him a lot.
By 1956, Life was 20 years old and coming of age. With a yearly profit of $17.5 million, the magazine was exceptionally wealthy. It was so successful that advertisers were falling over themselves to buy more and more pages. All that money allowed Life's photographers to do weird and wonderful things. They devised a host of bizarre cameras to capture the ever-advancing scale of man's achievements, from deep below the ocean surface to miles up into the Earth's atmosphere and even into outer space. Life pushed the boundaries of what could be photographed, creating world-class, jaw-dropping images that shook the world at the time. But most importantly, the money enabled Life's photographers to get closer to their subjects than ever before. I've come to Connecticut to meet the photographer Bill Eppridge.
Bill.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Good to see you, Rankin.
See you. How are you?
Bill's skill was stealth.
You got your camera there.
Always.
Observing his subjects like an undercover agent, he often spent 6 months on a single story. It's this commitment to embedding with subjects that was the breakthrough in getting to the truth, in pictures.
Just a common, ordinary, everyday couple crossing the street. You go to the next spread, and that's what they are. She came from a very fine family on Long Island. To make money to support her habit, she was a prostitute. He came from a very fine family in New Jersey. To make money, he stole. He boosted from cabs. He was a petty thief. All for money, for heroin. And I went and I lived with these people virtually for 22, 23 hours a day and tried to be invisible.
And that thing of embedding yourself, that was very particular to Life magazine. I mean, very few magazines, other magazines would have had the chance to do a 6-month story.
Yeah, it required time, but the magazine would give us the time.
Embedding with 2 heroin addicts threw up all kinds of complications and moral questions for the Life photographer. Bill frequently found himself tangled up in law-breaking and sometimes life or death situations.
My biggest problem at this point, knowing about it, do I call the police? Do I photograph it? I mean, the guy could have died. It's a very big dilemma. It's like standing there watching somebody on fire and you've got a bucket of water in one hand and the camera in the other hand. What do?
The heroin essay undoubtedly changed people's opinions of drug addicts. Even now, the images feel daring. There's no barrier between Bill and the couple. We see them as they really lived, as they really were. In 1968, Bill embedded with Senator Robert Kennedy on his presidential campaign. After victory in California, Bobby and his entourage came to the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles for what was meant to be a triumphant speech. Bill was about to take a career-defining picture, one I know well.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago and let's win this.
Bobby came off the stage, found us, and Bill Barry, who was the one bodyguard, said in very stern voice, and I know I'm this far away from him, I'm there. Barry said, "No, Senator, this way." And Bobby said, "No, Bill," and just turned on his heel and walked back towards the kitchen. I saw people diving for cover, what I thought was diving for cover. They weren't. These were people directly in front of me who were being shot.
Everybody else, just please stay back. Just a doctor, come right here. Said doctor in the house.
We took a couple steps forward and came upon Bobby lying there. As I got to his feet into a position, the crowd just opened for a second, and there he was, and the busboy was still holding him, Juan Romero still holding him, and I took one frame. It was totally out of focus. The second frame I made, he's in focus, but Juan Romero is looking down at him. The third frame, as quickly as I could make it, Juan Romero looks up towards me, and there's this kind of look of help me in his face. I've never been able to hang that picture on the wall. I can't.
You've never shown it?
I've shown it, but not in my home. I cannot put it up. Just because it brings back memories that I don't want. That picture still terrifies me, and I also think about what happened in this country afterwards and what should not have happened politically. And I'm sorry I had to make it, but it had to be done.
Bill's image definitely captured a moment. Robert Kennedy's assassination stunned America. Another irrational act to add to the anguish and conflict that was dividing the country. Bill's picture said it all. Something precious had been lost. I've met a few life photographers now, and it's becoming clear that every one of these guys had a role to play at key moments in American history. They were right there at the coalface, camera in hand.
I don't feel dressed for the occasion, but...
Yeah, well, hey, the fish don't know.
Just being in the company of guys like Bill has been an education for me. The life photographers were like a school of artists, an exclusive club, and their clubhouse was the photographer's common room, Room 2850.
My first visit to that office, I was a junior in college, so that probably would have made me about 19.
Wow. Was it amazing?
It was. It was. That's when I started learning. And that, I just did nothing else but learn at that magazine. Every one of those guys was a teacher. And I figure that's where I got my master's degree and maybe partway to a PhD. You walk in that office and you just never knew who was going to be there. I mean, Eisenstaedt, you walk in, he'd be sitting there doing something, and Carl Maidan's right next to him. I met Eugene Smith in there one day, once. I had the privilege of speaking to him. And it was in 2850.
I heard he was a bit grumpy.
Oh yeah, yeah, but hey, everybody's got to be something.
Life was like a family, and room 2850 was where the torch was passed. Bill's generation saw dramatic changes and the unravelling of a society which life had to some extent helped hold together. Life and its photographers went to new and dangerous places. The biggest story in 1960s America was happening halfway around the world. The war in Vietnam was tearing America apart. No war had been so vividly documented, so dramatically photographed as Vietnam, and the British photographer Larry Burroughs worked harder at it than most.
You can't let yourself think.
For 9 years he returned time and time again to record the events in that tragic conflict. To anyone but a photojournalist, that persistence must have seemed like an act of madness. Eventually he met his death there, shot down in a helicopter in 1971. I've come to meet Russell Burroughs, the son of life's greatest war photographer.
A lot of the war photographers are kind of seen as being quite macho, but from what I've heard, your dad was almost the opposite of that.
Yes, he was not a dare-doing man. He was a mild-mannered man who went to war. He talked about his experiences at war, but he never discussed the danger. It was no different going to Vietnam than going and spending the night at the Victoria and Albert Museum photographing.
He prepares for war like a soldier preparing for battle. He's a veteran. During the last 20 years, he's covered Cyprus, Suez, the Congo, the Chinese-India conflict, and South Vietnam.
There have been moments, yes, when your lips go dry and you sort of flick those, yes. And anybody that does not have any fear, then is a complete idiot.
And have you heard the rumours that guys that were fighting saw him as a kind of lucky mascot because he seemed to get away with, you know, not being shot?
Yes. For 9 years in Vietnam, he went again and again to the front. He took chances that other people would consider perhaps ridiculous, but they were calculated risks.
There's one particular story which was called One Ride with Yankee Papa 13, which involved 17 helicopters, 4 of which were shot down, and quite a lot of people were killed and wounded. And we tried to rescue a pilot off a ship, and we were trapped between these 230 caliber machine guns. The pilot was slumped over the controls. We could see him. Farley ran across, I ran after him. And visually, there were the sound of gunfire and all that was happening, but trying to do it visually was extremely difficult. It looked documentary. It was frustrating. The co-pilot that had climbed onto our ship had 2 bullet holes, one in the arm, one in the leg, one we hadn't noticed, which was the third one, which was just under the armpit, and he died. And it was a very sad moment, a very touching moment, when our crew chief broke down and cried. And so often I wonder whether it is my right to capitalize, as I feel so often, on the grief of others. But then I justify my own particular thoughts by feeling that if I can contribute a little to the understanding of what others are going through, then there's a reason for doing it.
There were letters of complaint about the graphic nature of some of life's war pictures, but the magazine held firm. John Shaw Billings, its first managing editor, once said, "If free men refuse to look at dead bodies, then brave men will have died in vain." Back home, America was burning. A change was sweeping the nation as Black America fought for equality. Just like Vietnam, life's coverage of the civil rights movement was opinionated, and deliberately so. From black bus riders who sat in the white seats of Mississippi to heavy-handed police treatment in Alabama, the man from life wasn't dodging any punches, he was getting stuck into the biggest issue of the day. Life gave these stories such prominence, there was no way America could ignore them. The 60s saw unprecedented change. But was life merely reporting it, or was it driving it? To answer that question, I've come to the South Bronx to meet one of its most fearless photographers, John Shearer.
This has got energy, this area, right? It's not like Manhattan.
To look at John's work, you might think he was a combat photographer, but these photos aren't from a distant battlefield. They were taken in America's backyard. When riots broke out at Attica Prison, John chose to walk in with his cameras. He spent 4 days inside in a riot where 41 men lost their lives.
So we're in the Bronx. Has it changed much?
You know, this street, it feels like I was here yesterday. Still really been able to hold on to that wonderful character it had, you know?
Can you tell me the ways that you felt America was changing when you started as a staffer at Life?
Well, America, you know, was exploding. I mean, I think I was lucky enough to live through the 60s and to be a working photojournalist during the 60s. The world was really changing radically, and I guess I was changing with it. I was, you know, my horizons were changing, and my views about things were changing.
Did you ever feel that the issues around the civil rights movement affected you directly at all?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, there was a greater need for black voices, blacks to help tell that story. And, you know, when I covered, you know, Selma and Birmingham and went to Jackson, Mississippi to cover the Klan and other kinds of stories, that was my beat, you know. And, you know, to me, certainly in terms of covering things, that was more important to me than covering like a Vietnam. I mean, because that was our story, you know. And so, you know, when I had the chance, I said, no, I'm going to stay here. I want to stay here and cover this.
I mean, I keep asking you this, but you weren't scared for your life at all?
I didn't think about it. I really didn't think about it. It was about the pictures, you know, and you know how that is.
Yeah. I'm saying yes, but the bravest I get is turning the air conditioning off in my studio. But I'm here in the middle of the South Bronx, and there's a good reason for that. John's brought me here because this was the site of another of his reportage missions. In 1972, he embedded for 6 weeks with a street gang known as the Reapers.
Now this has all changed. This is where we shot the gang meeting picture. I think Eddie stood on those steps right over there, you know, on the steps on the right, you know, and he would talk to all the fellows. But they were deciding that night, though, if they were going to go to war in another gang. One of the things you learned over the years is you always had a little bottle of vinegar with cotton in it in your shirt pocket. So that way, if you were ever in a situation where there was tear gas or any of that kind of stuff, you would just be able to stick that cotton in your nose to keep your eyes clear, you know. And those are the little things, you know, that you always had going on, you know. Also, you know, you tended to always dump your film, you know, as you went along through the day. So if you got into a jam, you know, you wouldn't have to worry about losing all the day's work, you know. So there was a couple of delis and a couple of other places where I would typically stash my stuff during the course of the day.
Wow.
And so I didn't have a lot of it on me, you know. Yeah.
John's an incredible guy, dedicated and totally fearless. I'm amazed the freedom he had to go out on his own and bring back the story. His beat, as he modestly described it, were the big stories of the late 1960s. But life's frontline coverage of civil rights in Vietnam seems to me a last gasp of campaigning photojournalism. By the early 1970s, a new national obsession was taking hold, one I know intimately: celebrity. So long the champion of making the ordinary extraordinary, life needed to feed this appetite. Despite publishing portraits of America's great and good since its earliest days, celebrity culture put the magazine under enormous pressure. Life needed a different kind of photographer, a pushy, hungry talent to get to the stars. Glaswegian Harry Benson was their man.
Oh, hello.
Oh, you. This is Rankin. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
This is
Who's
my
this?
son. This is my son, Oscar.
Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, yes.
I'm a big fan.
This enticing picture of Greta Garbo is a classic Benson celebrity portrait. It's a kind of hybrid shot, reportage with a hint of paparazzi.
How did you take these? Did you hide for these?
No, I was on a boat.
You were on a boat?
I kind of hiding, but I didn't mess up her holiday by chasing her.
Yeah, you just did one.
That's right. Well, maybe more than one.
Harry's treatment of Greta Garbo was a sign of things to come. As public figures began to put barriers up, photographers needed to devise ways to overcome them.
Well, I mean, my background was completely different, Rankin. I came from Fleet Street, London Daily Express. It was competitive, and it was fun. When I came to America and I started working for life was a dude ranch. You know, fancy limousines. You know, I was hungry.
Still hungry? You're still hungry now?
Yeah, I was hungry. That's why I would go and do any job. You're just like a rat. You're looking for ways to
capture something.
To capture, to have your wits about you.
To get your morsels, right?
And if you work hard, you're inclined to get lucky.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're incredibly humble about it, I have to say, Harry, because I think that, number one, you've got a fantastic eye, and number two, you know, yes, I agree with you, hard work gets you in those places, but to get that close to people and to be able to capture those images is very much a talent.
When there is an opportunity, the door opens slightly,
you ram your way through it.
Yeah, it's just like a rat. You know, a nasty dog coming through.
Harry's determination to get the picture meant he got some amazing portraits of famous, often very elusive people. And that's how life used him. If they had a tough subject, send in Benson. And they didn't come much tougher than the chess genius Bobby Fischer. Considered by many to be the most gifted player of all time, he was just as famous for being a cantankerous grump.
Bobby Fischer, everyone knew he was a piece of shit. He was terrible.
A nightmare to deal with.
Absolutely. But then it's a challenge. It was worth fighting for, to get as close as you can and get out. My idea has always been get in, get as close as you can and get out. I don't want to become friends with these people. None of them. I don't care. I mean, when I finish a job, and they ask me for dinner, and that happens often, I never go. I don't want the individual to say to me, "Oh, Harry, that picture of me in the bubble bath, please don't use it." Van Gogh's my best picture because of my new best friend, who isn't my best friend. It's somebody I photographed, you know. Never. No matter how difficult somebody is, at one time, the story will soften on you. And you've got to be ready for this. This is your road in. And that will happen on every story. There is a moment where you can take advantage, you can do your job. Because that's all I'm talking about, is being able to do your job. That's what President Nixon said to me when he let me into San Clemente after he got thrown out of office. I said, "I want to thank you, Mr. President. I know this isn't the best time of your life." And he said, "Well, Harry, you must allow professional people to do their job." Nixon, Johnson, Reagan. In fact, I photographed every American president since Eisenhower. I'm showing off now. I'm showing them.
That's good. I like that. I like it.
Showing off to everybody.
I can see why Harry continued to be such a success when photojournalism changed from the 70s and 80s. He's a scrapper. Even now, aged 81, he's still got his edge. The cult of celebrity marked a new era, but the demise of life. Since 1936, life had held America's hand through its greatest decades, witnessing its first steps as a superpower and the great blossoming that followed. Life's most powerful voices, its photographers, had championed America's greatest achievements, but certainly weren't afraid to reflect its darker, more painful divisions too. But the window on the world the men from Life created had splintered. TV was king now, and people's desire to create their own window on the world had begun. So in December 1972, the magazine closed, and many of its photographers hung up their cameras for good. When I came here, I wondered what it took to be the man from Life. Meeting the guys I have, I realised that I could never have been one. I'm just not brave enough. What I discovered is they're all incredible human beings first and photographers second. Luckily for us, they chose the camera to tell us who they were and how they saw their world.
So here I've got the last issue and the first issue of Life. And I guess it's kind of fitting that for the last issue of Life, they decided not to put a photograph on the cover. It's all text. In a way, it kind of like, it sums up the fact that it was over for the photographic magazine that had been so successful from the 30s onwards.
That's life. That's life. That's what all the people say. You're riding high in April, shot down in May.
All of those fantastic photographs that showed us a window into what America was like, its rise and development, we wouldn't have them. And that's why life's amazing.
I said that's life.
Life had a place in American homes, hearts and minds that I just hadn't understood before I came here. I don't think there's ever been a magazine that has had such a strong bond with its readers. And what a role Life played. Sometimes guardian, sometimes magician, and always, I think, a kind of teacher. Whatever Life set out to say, its language was always photography. And its lesson? To teach America how to be American.
Here's my race. That's life. That's life. And I can't deny it. Many times I thought of cutting out, but my heart won't buy it. But if there's nothing shaking come this here July, I'm gonna roll myself up in a big ball and